listener and viewer, and welcome back to the Tuesday show. We're very pleased to be back with you again, and hope if whether you're watching live or whether you're watching us on demand. Tonight, we've our special studio guest is Julian Sharpe, who is a trade union activist locally and a Labour Party member. So welcome, Julian, and we're going to be talking about COVID to begin with, whether COVID is now gone away and what measures we should continue taking. We're then going to go on to talking about our rewards, and then it's about 10:30. We're showing an interview I did earlier today with Sybil of the East London Palestine Solidarity Committee on recent events such as the Big Ride and on future events coming up. But before we kick into the bad news and the neutral news, let's have a quick moment to share some very, very, very positive news and perhaps unexpected news from a judiciary which is often not minded to give a fair hearing to Muslim people and or women. And we're just going to mark now the not guilty verdict that was given in the case of Apsana Begum, MP for Poplar and Limehouse. We're going to just congratulate Apsana. A lot has been written about the not guilty verdict, and but it leaves Apsana vindicated, and you can read more about that on East London News. But it also leaves both Tower Hamlets Council and also the Labour Party with quite a few questions to answer. So the case is certainly not over, but in the meantime, congratulations to Apsana, who has had a terrible fight to wage over the last 18 months. And I'm not sure I quite like the word brave. I think it's applied to women. In a way, it's not applied to men. But he's certainly shown a great deal of fortitude and bravery and strength, just plain strength, socialist strength to get through it. So it's not something we're going to talk further about today. But I mean, Julian, do you want to just have a word to sort of just express your view to Apsana?
Congratulations, Apsana. I don't think there's I was in any doubt that would be the verdict that should have been reached according to the evidence. I was actually there for a day of the trial, and it was quite clear that there was no real case. So yes, I mean, as you say, no doubt there's going to be an awful lot more arising from this case. As you say, the council, and particular people on the council, elected representatives and officers have answers to, of a lot of questions to answer. But first and foremost, as you say, I mean, I will say courage, I will say fortitude of Apsana. I think she's been through an awful lot the last year and a half, 2 years, and she's come through it amazingly. So yes, I think, as you say, there's a lot more to come from this case. That was probably not the time to go into all the ins and outs. But yeah, absolutely. Just to repeat, I think my admiration for Apsana, and she's a hell of an MP. She's an amazing MP, and to conduct her activities and her duties as an MP in the way she has, an exemplary manner over this past period when this has been hanging over, I think just shows what an amazing MP we have in Tower Hamlets.
Yeah. Okay. I never doubted she was innocent. I just was pessimistic as to whether the courts could.
Absolutely.
We've seen strange decisions of the courts before and had to overturn them, but tonight we rejoice, but we don't forget there's further work to do. So now, if you would like to join us on air and ask a question. I think somebody phoned in just before we went on air. You can phone us straight into the studio, 0208 12345 07. That's our telephone number. And you can also go onto our VOD Talk Facebook page, and you can leave us a message in the comments box. And I'll keep an eye on the comments box and I'll read them out. So do make a comment there too. So we've got some either on the issues we're discussing or anything else. So first of all, we're going to look at COVID, and I'm going to start by saying, well, I don't think we've talked about this, Julian, but you actually had a bout of COVID yourself, rather spectacularly. What was it like? How did it feel to have COVID?
I don't know if it's spectacular. Yeah, I mean, I came down with COVID around Christmas time. It just felt like a bad cold in the main, but a couple of weeks in, I didn't really shake it off. And I ended up having trouble breathing. And my oxygen levels plummeted a bit. So I had to go to hospital. I had to be put on oxygen. As I said, that for about 5 or 6 days, I think. And yeah, it's a bit of an experience, really, being on the ward with other people suffering from COVID, other people on oxygen. I was fortunate that, you know, as I said, after 5 or 6 days, they pumped me full of steroids, pumped me full of this, that, and the other. You know, fortunately, by January, you know, this year, they worked out a way to treat a lot of COVID patients. And I was kind of one of the lucky ones. And of course, you know, although they were rushed off their feet, extremely busy, the nurses and the doctors and all the auxiliary staff, the cleaners and so on, had, you know, were amazing. They did a fabulous job looking after me and the other COVID patients. But yes, this experience I wouldn't want anybody to go through, of course.
I mean, did you feel that the staff had enough protective equipment, were taking care? I don't know what kind of ward you were in, if it was a general ward or if it was a special COVID ward or even ICU, but did the staff seem to be properly equipped in the hospital?
Again, you know, you know, politicians talk about the bravery and courage of the staff in the hospitals during the COVID crisis and the pandemic. But I mean, if you're looking after patients, it's very difficult to have all the PPE and protective equipment that is needed to get, you know, to look at, you know, make sure they are safe. It's very difficult to treat patients with all the sort of covering that would be necessary. So no, they didn't have it, to be honest with you. And it's, you know, if say a nurse came to see you, because most of the time, most of the COVID patients, you know, had oxygen masks on. So of course there's no mask stopping the, you know, particles coming off them. So you'd say to them, oh, well, you know, don't put a mask on, and you know, you take your oxygen mask off and put a normal mask on to try at least, you know, stop as much as you possibly could of the virus getting across to them. But it's just, you know, it's a very difficult situation.
Do you think that, I mean, I've certainly heard reports on various WhatsApp forums that in the Royal London Hospital now, since the restrictions were eased on the 19th of July, it seems that visitors are going into the hospital without masks on and walking around, sharing the lift, which had previously been marked out for social distancing. And there are a number of people I know in Tower Hamlets who are sort of anti-COVID activists who are quite worried about that. If any of you are listening, do ring in or give us a Facebook comment and tell us your story and what you know, you think should actually be done about that. I don't know if you've been following events in Tower Hamlets, Julian. I mean, if there's any measures you suggest, we've had some various vaccination days and so on. I mean, do you think the public authorities are really pulling together as much as they could?
Well, I think the key is for people to get vaccinated. That's the first thing. And I think, I mean, but even then, of course, that's not the whole way we can we can deal with this virus. I think people really should be wearing masks indoors. That's my personal view. I think it's backed up by what, for example, Scotland announced today. Nicola Sturgeon announced that masks would be continue to should be worn indoors in Scotland. I think the virus is the same in England as it is in Scotland, so I don't see why we shouldn't be wearing masks indoors. So I would hope whatever decisions are being made in the London hospital are being made on a clinical basis and not on a political basis, just to go along with what the government is saying, in England at least. I would presume not. I presume the decisions will be made on a clinical basis. But I mean, I would be concerned if people are going into the hospital without masks. But of course, the issue is, well, the people running the hospital, they're not, there's not a whole lot of security guards there. There's not policemen patrolling the corridors. How on earth do you police these things if people choose not to wear masks? And of course, that ties into the example being given by the government. If the government are saying there's no need to wear masks anymore, then it's not surprising people, fewer people are wearing masks, which then places the hospital authorities in an invidious position, because that's the example being given to them. So it's not an easy situation at all for anybody.
I think possibly the hospital authorities are relying on ordinary NHS staff who are medical staff to remind people as they see them. But it's not really their job if you're walking at home to collect things. And of course, in London, we still have masks on public transport. I got quite lost the other day. I went into, it was outside London, but I went into a petrol garage I go to quite often, which has a little co-op shop. And for the last several months, they've had the floor marked out, so you know which way to go, and it's got marked out the other way, so you know how to stay socially distant. I went up to the till, paid for whatever I was paying for, turned around, and I looked at the floor, and all the marks had gone. And for a moment, I just felt totally at a loss. Which way do I walk? So I said that rather loudly. Oh, I don't know how to get out of here now. The various staff came to the assistance of the bewildered old bag lady who couldn't manage to get out of the shop, but I managed it in the end. But I was still disturbed.
Yeah. But of course, in all these examples, I mean, you cite the case of the NHS workers who are, in a sense, being lent upon by the management of these hospitals to, in a sense, do an extra job and an extra duty on top of what they're doing. That, as you say, it isn't really their job. And shop workers as well. I mean, if the people who run these shops and these managers of the shops, take away these sorts of, protective markings, or the whole sort of apparatus of trying to keep people safe in these shops, then where does that, shoppers going in for 5, 10, 15 minutes or whatever, doing a little bit of shopping and coming out. But of course, the people who work in these shops are there 8 hours, at a time, or possibly more. And they're the ones who are really being put at risk at all this.
Well, we've had a little bit of comment from the trade unions, haven't we, on how to protect transport workers, for example. I'm sure you're right. Shop workers are in the same position, but it's not really come across very strongly, has it? Maybe it's just not been reported. But
and the thing is, of course, is that there's a false dichotomy set up, isn't there? Of we have to return the economy back to normal. And of course, companies and people's profits are at risk in all this. So either we go back to normal, or we don't, and we have masks, and there's restrictions and problems and so on. But of course, if people's lives are at risk throughout all this, then some basic safety precautions. You're not shutting the whole economy down, not shutting the society down, but some basic, simple precautions would help everybody. And ultimately, it would help the economy in the long run, of course, because if things do take off again, the economy will be further hit. So it's just common sense, really, I would have thought. So I'm a bit surprised it's not being applied.
I get the feeling that Boris Johnson is just continuing the head in the clouds approach that he operated all the time he was Mayor of London. But there we are. Okay, well, that was an interesting discussion on COVID. Don't forget, people, get vaccinated. Herd your kids up, even if they're over 18, and drag them down. Get vaccinated. It's not just you. You might feel young and healthy, and you might feel nervous about the vaccine, but you've got to feel a lot more nervous about COVID. And it's not just whether you personally can survive an attack of COVID. It's also whether your contacts can. And it's also the more people have COVID, the more chance that we are giving the virus to develop new variants. So potentially the unvaccinated people could be very dangerous. So take them down. I think there's still the Arts Pavilion in Tower Hamlets is still open for vaccines. Yeah. But let's move on and have a quick word about Tower Rewards. If you remember, would you like to sum up? What was Tower Rewards, Julian? It sounds like a nice thing. Oh, rewards.
Well, that was the image, wasn't it, portrayed? I mean, Tower Rewards was essentially a new contract of employment for workers at Tower Hamlets Council. And what happened, of course, is that the chief executive of Tower Hamlets Council and the mayor effectively imposed this contract on Tower Hamlets council workers. And they did this by, in effect, sacking the workers and re-employing them on the new contract. Now, of course, the new contract, okay, one or two people, or a small number of people benefited from it. But by and large, most council workers ended up with worse terms and conditions of service. Now, you remember, this is a tactic that I think BA used for its workers. And when BA used it, Keir Starmer, the Labour Party leader, condemned BA for obviously such an anti-worker and anti-trade union attitude to its workforce. But of course, Tower Hamlets Council, the Labour Council, of course, Labour has a huge majority in the council, of course, did it to its members. Not surprisingly, the unions of the workers objected to this. There were ballots of workers for industrial action that was successful. Industrial action actually was taken by Unionist in Tower Hamlets. And the council was in dispute. Let's say a Labour council in dispute with recognised trade unions in the council. And this dispute has dragged on. A lot of this happened last year, and this dispute has dragged on now for over a year. And I think it was last week, the end of last week, Unison had another ballot about Tower Rewards, and although a majority of workers voted for industrial action, the government has imposed a very high barrier of turnout that the union has to meet in order for it to be a lawful ballot.
Yes, I've got the figures in front of me.
There we are.
The second ballot, it just shows how if an employer is persistent and not in too much of a hurry, they can grind the workforce down until people feel very hopeless. But in the first ballot, to take action, a trade union has to have a ballot of its members, and there has to be an over 50% turnout of those members in the ballot, a threshold which is not applied, of course, to elected councillors, many of whom have been elected after a much lower turnout than 50% of the electors. And that threshold was met in the first ballot, and people were very cross and very enthusiastic to show how serious they were. And even Dave Prentice, the Unison General Secretary, piled in and asked the council, asked the mayor not to sack the workers and impose the new contracts. But the turnout in the second ballot was only 36.5%. So the vote was invalid. But in that invalid vote, 82% of the people who voted were prepared to take strike action again against what was left in the contracts. So there's a very difficult situation where you win a majority, but your views are actually declared non-valid. I think we just have to put out the general message that people have to join a trade union to protect them at their workplace and be active in it, really. So
no, absolutely. I think as well. I mean, firstly, I think the rank and file members in the Tower Hamlets Unionist branch, have shown they're prepared to struggle. There were some magnificent turnouts, both of people on strike and people on picket lines last year during the strikes. So they showed they were determined to struggle. And to be fair, I think the leadership of the branch itself, the union branch, showed that they were prepared to struggle as well. I think, personally, I don't think they got the backing they should have got from the Unionist headquarters. I think they should have backed the union branch a lot more, because the action last year was effectively called off while they saw talks with the council. And those talks never really materialised. I don't think even there's a single proper talk actually held. And of course, that was over a year ago. And of course, the contracts have been in place now for over a year. So, it's a magnificent majority in favour of strike action. But I'm not surprised that, they didn't make the 50%.
Well, I think there were overall across the process, that's before the industrial action, but I think in whatever consultation there was afterwards, I think the union is saying that at least some parts of the contracts were protected, and so there is a positive outcome, even if it's not a total victory, because gains were made and because the workforce has shown how serious it is. So I suppose if there are, the big worry now is the thing the council seemed most determined to get put across was to reduce redundancy pay. So you have to ask yourself, why were they so keen to do that? And the worry is that they're planning mass, large-scale redundancies. If it was just half a dozen people they were making redundant, they probably wouldn't have gone to these lengths. So we do have to worry. We've seen so many cuts over the last 5 years or so, haven't we?
Yeah, and we do know that pre-COVID pandemic, the council's finances were not in a good state, and they were looking to make huge cuts after next year's elections. Now, perhaps the COVID pandemic is changing slightly, perhaps in the short term, because of emergency financing, essentially, from the central government. But that still remains the fear, of course. And of course, as you say, why would they reduce the cost of making redundancies? There can only be one reason why they wanted to do that.
Well, speaking about redundancies in political places, of course, we're speaking in the same week, a couple of weeks after the Labour Party announced it's going to make 90 of its own staff redundant. And I was certainly speaking to people at the weekend who were saying that even the Labour Party is now prepared to sack staff and reimpose on new conditions. I haven't got verification of that, but we have to watch that and see how the Labour Party staff deal with redundancies as well. So, and it's silly as well, because after you have redundancies with fewer people earning, there's fewer people going out and buying things, whether it's one of those fancy coffees or whether it's household goods or whatever, and that's going to slow the economy down again. So I would have thought it makes good sense to avoid redundancies if you possibly can, certainly in the public sector. But there we are. Watch this space.
Yeah, I would simply say it looks as if Keir Starmer's following an example of BA and Tower Hamlets Council.
Well, at least we found one fan of the way Tower Hamlets Council does things. So there we are. And thank you to Amy for commenting on the Facebook page and agreeing that it's absolutely shameful what happened with Tower Rewards.
Yeah.
So, but we carry on. So now we want to watch now an interview. It's about 12 minutes long that I did earlier today with Sybil Cock of the East London Palestine Solidarity campaign, and we covered the event on Sunday. I don't know if you were able to go to it, Julian. I wasn't, but
no, I was away, unfortunately. I heard about it and I saw the photos.
Yes. So there are lots of photos around. I don't have any of those to hand, but let's now listen to this short interview, about 11 minutes long, with Sybil, who has always got all the facts at her fingertips, and she'll tell us what's happened around the big ride, why it was different from the first big ride, and then give us some prior notice of some events coming up, and some reminders for particularly Redbridge residents, but also Tower Hamlets and Newham. So if we can show the video now, that would be great. Campaign, and we're just going to have a quick chat about recent events and a bit of a look to the future. So welcome, Sybil. I know on Sunday you had your reception for the big ride after 2-3 years of waiting, but can you tell us first of all what actually is the big ride?
Okay, nice to talk to you again, Jenny. Thank you for having me. The Big Ride for Palestine is an organisation. They have been riding for 7 years now, every year except last year where they did it virtually, and they are a group of people who combine a love of cycling with caring about the situation in Palestine and wishing to publicise it and also to raise money. So they raise money, the riders are all sponsored, they raise money for a children's charity in Gaza that builds playgrounds and provides bicycles, and they have raised very large amounts of money over the years, and this year's ride was the biggest and most successful ever. This year they started in Bristol on Thursday morning. They rode from where they had a reception. They rode to Swindon where they had a reception on Thursday evening, Friday evening in Oxford, Saturday evening in Luton, and Sunday afternoon in Tower Hamlets. Brilliant. And there are probably 250 riders.
Wow.
More. Yeah, lots. A very impressive bunch of people, yeah.
And
yes.
I think it was a couple of years ago you were hoping to welcome them to Tower Hamlets, but they were not able to come. Can you just remind us why that was?
I will remind you why that was. I've worked closely with the Big Ride for a number of years, and it was suggested that it would be nice in the ride 2 years ago to have that 2 years ago. It was done in several legs. Anyway, to have the London leg ending in Tower Hamlets. And so we set about, we as East London PSC, and PSC supports the Big Ride. It's we work together. We went through the process of applying for a park in Tower Hamlets. It's quite a daunting sort of process. You have to fill in lots of forms, and which is fine. And we were told after about a month after I sent the application in, we were told that no, we couldn't use a park in Tower Hamlets. And the reason that was given was that we don't have political rallies in Tower Hamlets parks. Now, as a Tower Hamlets resident of many, many years, I know that to be not the case. They are very frequent. There are all sorts of political rallies and events in Tower Hamlets parks, but that's what we were told. But we didn't take no for an answer, and PSC nationally did some freedom of information requests from Tower Hamlets, and we uncovered a whole stream of emails from the council officers, which basically indicated that when they got the application, they were very worried that the event might be deemed to be anti-Semitic. So the council at this point, this is 2 years ago, 2019, had just adopted the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which is highly contested, and we'd asked them not to. We'd pointed out the problems that would mean for Palestinians speaking out the borough, but they insisted. So we found out that they were lying to us. They were lying about the reason, because they acknowledged that the reason was actually the worry about anti-Semitism, but they decided not to tell us that because they said that would grow into some sort of a major scandal. Unfortunately, they hadn't reckoned with our persistence on the freedom of information. So the story came out. What happened was we had a plan B, which was to use St John and Bethnal Green, and we had a very successful end rally there. Father Alan Green was inordinately helpful. We had speakers. We had Mark Thomas, the comedian. It was a great event. And that was 2 years ago, almost exactly 2 years ago. And that was that. Then last year it didn't happen because of COVID. And then this year it became apparent that it would happen. And so we decided, this is me and the Big Ride and PSC, that we would again go through the process of applying, which we did. It was mainly me, but also people from Big Ride. We applied, we did the risk assessment. We got into all sorts of dialogues with the borough about, they were quite nitpicky about it. I mean, fair enough. It's the same form as you have to fill in if you want to, if you want to host a fun fair or host a big pop festival in Victoria Park. We were talking about 250 riders and maybe 50 or 100 members of the public with 3 stalls. But anyway, we had to go through all that, and eventually they said yes. There was a last minute change of venue because, in fact, there was a fun fair in Ryland Park last week, and it absolutely completely trashed the grass, a combination of fun fair and rain. So we had to move to a different bit of Ryland Park, which we managed to do. And we paid the borough for the privilege of using the park.
That's odd, isn't it? I mean, it was a charity fundraising event. And you had to pay the council.
We had to pay £475.
So that's £470 less to spend on bicycles for children in Gaza.
Yes, absolutely. And when I spoke to the council officer, because she was very helpful, I mean, she was very thorough, and I said, I hope you're getting a lot of money out of this fun fair. She couldn't disclose that, and I said, well, can we have a discount because we now can't use the bit that we wanted to use? And she said, no, that's our lowest rate for community organisations. And we could have just turned up there and used it, but I didn't want to do that because we had stalls, we were providing food for the riders. We had to, do it properly.
Absolutely.
And I wasn't, I wanted it to be done properly.
Yes.
So
well, I've written about it several times in East London News. So for further information, our viewers can actually go to the East London News website and just search the Big Ride, or for that matter, just search Palestine, and you can get all the detail there. And I think one of the stories mentions that we know that there are political events in the parks, because there's even party political events in the park. And one of John Biggs's pre-election rallies was held in Altab Alley Park.
Yes.
So with Roshnara Ali. So clearly,
yes. And in fact, we wanted to use Altab Alley Park, and they said absolutely not because of landscaping issues. I don't know what it is. And in fact, last summer when the Black Lives Matter things were happening, John Biggs was at a Black Lives Matter knee ceremony. I was there. And I said to him, John, is this a political rally in town? And he said, I certainly hope so. He's wearing Black Lives Matter t-shirt. Yes. And then he looked at me, everyone's wearing masks. He looked at me and said, oh, it's Sybil, isn't it? Scuttled off. So, yeah. So, yes.
I'm sure he was delighted to see you and to give you the confirmation that, party, political events are now being held in our parks. So that's so good. But how actually was it?
It was brilliant.
Sunday.
It was absolutely brilliant. We had an army of volunteer stewards all wearing yellow jackets. We set up 3 stalls, one to give out food was given to the riders. It was part of their registration fee. We had a Palestinian handicraft stall which did a roaring trade in olive oil and little pots and little embroideries. And we had an information stall for the Big Ride and for PSC. And then we had the speakers, and there was a huge, great Palestinian flag. I'll send you pictures. We got a professional photographer actually. And the riders arrived at about 5:05, and we knew they were coming. And they just piled into Wellington Road at the top of Wellington Green and shouting and whooping, and it was absolutely brilliant. They got off and they came across the grass and got their food, because obviously they were wrecked from having been. And the amazing thing is it didn't rain. We were expecting rain. It didn't rain, and it was just wonderful. And we had the Palestinian ambassador to the UK spoke, and he was very good, and Kamel Hawash, who's the chair of PSC, who's also Palestinian, spoke, and Alexei Sale spoke. He was one of the riders. So yeah.
People who missed the actual live event, was there any video taken?
There was a lot of video taken. I think we're still in the process. Well, I mean, I've got lots of videos, but actually somebody videoed the whole thing. I've got that. I'm not sure of the quality of it. I think somebody at PSC at the moment is trying to process it into something slightly, because it's 45 minutes and nobody's going to watch 45 minutes. But I've certainly got, there's a lot of video around, and I can certainly send that.
Yeah. Well, let us know if something goes up on the PSC website, and we'll alert everyone who can get in to watch it. So there's just one last question, because we do have to sort of move on, I'm afraid, and that is, what's next for the Palestine Solidarity Committee in East London? I think you've just set up a Redbridge branch, haven't you?
We've just set up a Redbridge branch. So the events, what happened in Palestine in May with the attack on the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the attack on Sheikh Jarrah, meant that there were demonstrations all over the country, you know, really, really angry people about Palestine. I mean, not to mention in Palestine, but around London. There were several in Redbridge, and lots of people wrote into head office and saying, could we have a branch in Redbridge? And I was, because I'm also on the national executive, I was asked to help them. So I gave them a hand. They're now set up, and that's great. So the Redbridge branch, we also have branches in Waltham Forest and in Hackney and East London, which is Tower Hamlets and Newham. We're probably going to rename ourselves. East London's a bit confusing, but so on the, I think it's the 14th of September, but again, I'll send you the details. The Dicey Arms Fair, this vast international arms fair, comes to Newham, to
the Excel Centre, isn't it?
The Excel Centre, every 2 years, and basically parades military vehicles that, kill people all over the world, but in particular there are lots of Israeli exhibitors. So there is a demonstration planned. There's quite a series of protests planned around that in the middle of September. So that is probably the next thing that is going to happen in a big way. And there's going to be a rally and a demonstration in a park. Again, I can't quite recall the details, but yeah, you can put that up. It's certainly something to, and that's being organised by PSC nationally and by East London, particularly the people in Newham, but also the people in Tower Hamlets. So
we'll look forward to that. I know it's very difficult if you demonstrate at the site.
Yes.
If there's an additional event where people, can feel that they can get in without having to battle their way.
Security. Well, that's the problem, is that there was I think there was a bit of debate, which I wasn't party to, about whether to do it actually outside the site where you'd get cleared away by security guards within seconds, or to have it slightly, somewhere where you can actually have it. So, where you can rally people. So a lot of people will be there, and, the arms fair is an outrage. And I think, the Mayor of London has sort of said, I'd rather it didn't happen, but actually he could be a lot more explicit about it. He could say, no, I don't want it.
Well, he could offer to speak at the rally, couldn't he?
But he could indeed offer to speak at the rally, and I think those are the sorts of thoughts that are going on at the moment. Because if he doesn't want it, he needs to say he doesn't want it. Nobody really wants an arms fair on their patch, do they?
Well, I remember talking about this with at a meeting with Ted Johns, who used to be a well-known activist on the Isle of Dogs. Unfortunately, he's sadly passed away now. But I remember him saying that I think it was his grandfather had stood at the docks when the Jolly Roger sailed to disrupt the emerging Soviet Union.
Yes.
And he was very cross with our local MP at the time, who was accepting the arms fair which was then in Docklands, the same wharf in Docklands.
Really?
The arms fair. Yes, and Ted Johns, referring to the then local MP, who's now retired, said, we have words for people like that in East London. Unfortunately, as we're broadcasting, I can't tell you what the word he said actually was, but it was indeed a word.
It was, I can imagine.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, we look forward to that, Sybil. Thank you so much for coming on, and maybe you'll come on again, maybe towards the end of the month or something. And we can talk about the Desai event.
We certainly can. In fact, I'm not going to be around for the arms fair thing because I'm going to be away, but one of my colleagues in Newham would be happy to talk to you.
Lovely. That's great. Okay, thank you, Sybil.
Thank you very much. Soon. Thank you. See you soon. Bye.
Bye. Well, always a treat to hear Sybil, because when she talks about her campaign, she's all sort of throwing facts in, and it's nice to speak to somebody who's so knowledgeable about what's going on. Just before we get back to Palestine, I'm just going to say thank you, Sabia, for commenting on our Facebook page in support of Amy, saying that she's seconding Amy, and it was an utter disgrace to impose the Tower Awards contract in Tower Hamlet. So thank you, Sabia. And we've got a few minutes left, so do ring in 0208 123450 if you'd like to have a quick word on Palestine and congratulate the big ride or whatever. And do also comment on Facebook again if you prefer that way, but we need a bit of support for the Palestinian cause, so do contribute in the last minutes. What I want to ask you, Julian, is Palestine. I mean, there's a lot of people across East London who are appalled at what the state of Israel has done to the Palestinians, particularly recently, and also, not wanting to be anti-Semitic and not feeling any hatred towards Jewish people, but very cross at what the state of Israel is doing. So is it those people who will secure policy change in the UK, or is this something that actually the Labour movement, the Labour Party and trade unions have to work for? What do you think about that?
Well, I think, it's a huge question. The Labour Party should support the struggle of the Palestinian people. That's not, I think that's what the Labour Party should be doing. All credit to the Big Ride people. I think it's great what they did. I don't understand why it couldn't have happened in Tower Hamlets a couple of years ago. I'm struggling to understand that. But of course, for me, I'm a socialist. I think, the solution to Palestinian question, Israeli question is socialism in the Middle East, basically, which I know is a big thing to say, but that's the answer. That's the solution. That's what I think we need to work for. Both, as far as supporting the struggle of the Palestinian people is concerned, and obviously fighting for socialism here in Britain as well.
Do you have any views on how we can build support for the campaign against the Desai arms fair coming up? Sybil mentioned a rally. Is there anything else we can do to show solidarity?
Well, again, I think it's something the Labour movement should be thinking about, both local trade unions and the Labour Party itself. Looking to support the protests and the demonstrations. And as I said, support, overall the struggle of the Palestinian people. If there's probably one, I should call it, issue outside Britain, and let's put it that way, that's perhaps, matters most, I think, to the people of Tower Hamlets is Palestine. And, you see how, the oppression and suppression of the Palestinian people over many years, on our television screens, over and over again. And, that has such a huge impact, people watching that. Clearly, we need to do something.
I think in some ways there's sort of three quite similar struggles going on. There's the oppression of the Uyghur people in China, and there's also the fate of the Rohingya people in exile in Bangladesh and those who are not yet in exile. And I think maybe it's all three things together that we need to campaign on, and certainly campaigning on the Palestine issue, I think, for me, just feels like also showing solidarity with the struggle of those two other people. We do hope to have somebody on to talk about the Uyghurs and the campaign against their oppression by China very soon. So I'm looking forward to trying to set that up.
And of course, just to say, obviously, small nations or minorities or whatever nations, very often they get the kind of raw deal and this, of any kind of political movements, political upheavals, wars, revolutions, whatever. And, often the big nations just, use them as so much small change to be exchanged between them.
Yes, and I think
it's a common theme, as you say.
It is, and really, objectively, I don't understand how people justify it. There seem to be, it's one thing for the Chinese government to oppress the Uyghurs, it's one thing for the Myanmar government to persecute the Rohingya, and the state of Israel to kill Palestinians. But how can other countries stand by and just say, oh, well, that's okay, we want trade partners? Don't understand it at all, I'm afraid. But certainly we can work towards doing something to support the anti-arms trade rally, can't we? Because if we don't sell arms to Israel and to a number of these other oppressive regimes, they're not going to be so strong when it comes to bundling people up and killing and persecuting them. So
absolutely,
that's very important. Right. Okay. Well, I think we're coming towards the end of our time now, so we need to begin to wrap up. Just a reminder to people to get themselves and their nearest and dearest vaccinated when necessary. That's our first conversation. To get ready to show solidarity with Tower Hamlets workforce if the council leadership does try to have mass sackings. Of course, another thing that we could campaign on, I suppose, is for a return to the policy whereby we flew the Palestinian flag at the town hall. That would actually show this borough's support for the Palestinian people, wouldn't it? I think there's now some suggestion that it's the chief executive who's going to decide what flags are flown at the town hall, and he's going to be politically neutral in doing that. I just can't see myself that that's a good idea. It would be a good thing to fly the flag. It hasn't been done since Dr. Rahman was mayor.
Yeah, I don't see how a Labour council is trying to be non-political. I don't think a Labour council is elected to be non-political. I think it's been elected to be political. So I don't quite understand why you have all these, frankly, bonkers policies of, a Labour council trying to be politically neutral. What's it there for? It's there to represent the working class. And that's what they should be doing.
Yes, absolutely. That's something that's a sentiment that's relevant to so many different things. Well, let's thank our viewers this evening. Any last words from you, Julian? There's no necessity to have any, but I don't want to cut you off.
No, thank you for having me.
It's been a good discussion.
Good.
So it's nice to return to our viewers, and hope you've enjoyed our discussion. If you have, then do send a link out on your social media. I know that a lot of people watch our videos on demand rather than live, but I mean, look, Newsnight's on at 10:30, so I don't see why we can't be on at 10. But there we are. Watch on demand as well. Let people know, because I think it's been very enjoyable. Now, next week we shall return with a very special guest. I'm not going to say too much now, but we will start publicising the event, and we are discussing the legacy of the reorganisation of sport in Tower Hamlets. So I hope we'll get a lot of callers on that, because I know a lot of people are very agitated about that change in how sport for young people is carried out in the borough. So I'll stop whittering. I'm quite good at whittering, but it's not necessarily useful. So we'll say goodnight to Julian. Thank you for coming. We'll see you again soon. Thank you for watching. To our viewers, again, do share the link around, and be prepared to tune in again at 10 o'clock next Tuesday for to look at the politics of sport. Thank you very much and good night.
Thank you. Good night.